Good afternoon, everybody. Like Steve said, my name is Gareth Nation, head of Minerva Primary School. I'll give a bit of context in a minute, but just lots of things that people have said that's resonated already. Lovely to hear Tim talking about and challenging that concept of behaviour management, which is quite a term that's been used in education for some time, that I think needs to be challenged. Tracy's comments around from the Body Project and that cultural transformation, and Megan from Splash, there was a lot of what you said that resonated with me around the importance of relationships and people being heard and validated. So, like I said, my name's Gareth Nation. I'm head of Minerva Primary School. In Taunton, it's in the bottom 5% of the most deprived areas in the country. It's been in a category of concern since 2015. When I arrived just under 3 years ago, I was the 6th head teacher in 7 years. 32% of our cohort are neurodivergent, so that's kind of a formally recognised special educational need. 62% of the school population are entitled to the pupil premium grant, and we also track the children's ACEs. And so over 70% have 3 or more ACEs. There's only 10% of the school population that don't have any. I'm going to start with a story. It looks a little bit like I'm maybe promoting a book. That's not my book. It's a book called Think Again by Adam Grant, which tells the story of, in the introduction, of 15 men in 1949 who were elite smoke jumpers. And they descended over the Montana skies onto Mount Gulch to extinguish a fire. And what they didn't realize was that within minutes of landing, they would be running for their lives from flames that were reaching up to 30 feet in height, covering 2 football pitches in a matter of minutes. And the leader of that team was a chap called Dodge Wagner. And he realized quickly upon landing that him and his team were in mortal danger, and therefore directed the team to run up to the hill, at the top of the hill, to safety. In doing so, he soon realized that the flames were approaching and they were not going to be able to outrun the flames. So, much to his team's surprise, he started to burn the scrubland around him, covered himself in whatever clothing that he had on him, and stuffed a wet handkerchief into his mouth, and survived on the floor with the fire raging around him for about 15 minutes. Needless to say that he wasn't unscathed. He tried to beckon some of his team back, but they kind of just looked upon him in amazement, wondering what on earth was he doing. And consequently, 12 out of the 15 elite smoke jumpers that landed on Mount Gulch that day perished. Of the 3 that survived, 2 survived due to their physical agility and fitness and made it to the top of the hill. And the other person that survived was Dodge Wagner due to his mental agility. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that the team had been trained to burn land around them, therefore there was nothing for the fire to burn, therefore they could potentially save themselves. But that wasn't part of their training back in 1949. So this was kind of intuitive thinking from Dodge Wagner. And I guess, so the question is then, why on earth am I telling this story? Well, if we think of, that notion of the elite smokers being trained to use specific tools to, extinguish the fires and save themselves from the situation that they're in, those 13 that perished in that fire were all found clutching on to the tools that they were trained to use to extinguish fires. And of course, if they'd have dropped those tools, they would have been able to run quicker and potentially would have made it to the top of the hill. So that concept that we're trained and kind of almost conditioned into using certain things to solve certain situations. So when I arrived at Minerva Primary School in 2021, there were all of the things that you would expect to see in a primary school. There were extrinsic rewards, certificates for good attendance, good achievement, good effort, and so forth. Everybody understood the rules that were in place. They were applied fairly consistently, but there was a great sense of compliance and extrinsic motivation. Regardless of all of those things that were in place, the attendance was well below the national average. Suspensions were well above the national average. permanent exclusions had been well above the national average. And as I said, the school had been in a category of concern and inadequacy for some time. So it was clear that in order for the school to move forward, we had to rethink our approach. We had to rethink the tools that we were using. We had to rethink how we were doing things, as well as what we were doing, of course. And in leadership, it's of course it's about the what that you're doing, but it's also and almost more important about the rationale behind why you're doing something, and then crucially how you're going to do it. So in terms of a trauma-informed approach at the school, there are countless number of things that we do. And there's a list there of things that you can read through as I'm talking. I'm not going to read out or elaborate on them because I'd be here all afternoon. But there's been a relentless focus at the school on thinking about our systems and processes and why they're in place and if they're fit for purpose. And if not, how do we change them in line with latest research? A focus on the initiatives that are being implemented and the timing of those initiatives being implemented and why we're implementing certain initiatives. So we work closely with a range of other professionals. The work that's come out from Tim Cockrell and his team around the Pathfinder project, a lot of professional development for the team around Thrive, which kind of builds on that understanding of trauma-informed approach and the impact that has on children's cognitive development. A real focus on the relational policy and practice that we have in school and how the kind of hard to reach staff, if you like, so those staff that aren't always part of the weekly meetings, how do we reach those staff to make sure that trauma-informed practice and that relational policy and practice is really kind of hitting home on the ground and it's really playing out. So building those relationships with the staff, building those relationships with the children, making sure that practice is in line with our relational policy, and then really ramping up the kind of responsibilities that the children have within the school. So we refer to our pupils here as Minerva citizens. The classes are named after key landmarks in Taunton. Our curriculum obviously works in line with the national curriculum, but is geared around giving the children a real sense of who they are at Minerva Primary School, the role that they have to play, and therefore who they are in the wider world. And the vast majority of children at the school have a responsibility and a role, and they have to apply for that role much like they would as a job. They have to write a written application, and that they've got there's a person specification and a job kind of list of responsibilities that they have to write to that. So there's a whole range of different kind of initiatives that we have thought carefully about and why we're doing them. But crucially, it all comes back to those relationships that we have with the children and their families. And I think it was Megan that talked about the kind of negative experiences that people have with their weight. And of course, people have that with schools as well. And I've always felt that schools are quite archaic in their approach if we're not careful, and we have to really challenge that and drag education kicking and screaming into the 21st century, if you like. So just on that notion of relationships, and we talked about it's kind of not the what that we do, but the how that we do, that sense of belonging. So a book by Owen Eastwood, if you've ever read it, it's a wonderful book. It's not a difficult read. If you've ever had the opportunity to listen to him speak, I strongly recommend it. There's not a dry eye in the house. But he talks a lot about the ancient code of togetherness and the power of togetherness and the power of connection. I'm a firm believer that these things are often overcomplicated. There's a lot of research out there, really valid research that has got to inform what we do, but we mustn't overcomplicate things. Things are difficult enough as they are. It doesn't mean that they're easy, but it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. And this book, Belonging, is a lovely book. In summary, when I talk about Minerva Primary School, I talk about flooding the school with love over the past kind of 3 years, But that's not a woolly approach. That's underpinned with our values and our vision. And you can see on the screen in front of you, there's it's called dual coding, but it's an image of the foundations of what we do in the green column at the bottom is there are values. The three columns that are standing up right there, they are the kind of areas, emotional health, well-being, and so forth, that everything that we do fall into one of those columns. And we're all striving for excellence to make everything achievable. The image of the moon is about, there was a lovely story where a caretaker once was asked when he was sweeping up the hall after lunch, what he was doing, and he said, I'm helping get children to the moon. So that notion that everybody is on board with the vision and values of what the school and what we're trying to achieve for these children. Okay, I'm conscious of time, but I'm just going to kind of summarize and wrap up. So, you know, the impact of what we've done to date, and we're certainly by no means there, but the impact of the relational policy and practice and the trauma-informed approach that we have, the human connection that we have at the school is much stronger than what it ever has been. And the outcomes are, so last autumn, we were in the top 25% of all schools nationally, top 10% of similar primary schools in similar contexts to ours, in the top 10% for our attendance. You can see the images around the data around dysregulated behavior and how that's significantly reduced over the years. So we've had, there's been 2 instances of suspension so far this year, minimal kind of low level concerns that take place on the playground at lunchtime and so forth. That's all down to the zoning that we do and making sure that it's alive with music, children dancing, dressing up, taking calculated risks, so on and so forth. And Ofsted recognised that our behaviour and attitudes and personal development is now good. We've even tested how far we've come with that by having axe throwing at the school, and to see a 7-year-old stood alongside his parent throw a hatchet in controlled circumstances, as you can imagine, was a real moment to cherish. And I was told that we're the first school in Somerset to do that, so it was a fascinating experience. But whilst that was going on, we had parents inside the hall cooking the vegetables that we'd grown outside and making stew and so forth. So all sorts of really wonderful things that you'd expect to see in a school, but it all comes back to those relationships. I could waffle for ages about our amazing school and the amazing team and the amazing children and community that we serve, but I'm going to leave you with this image, which I'll give you a few seconds to look at it. Probably think that you're looking at an image of 2 dogs and somebody walking their 2 dogs, but actually if you look closer, it's a picture of 3 dogs. So the 2 dogs clearly on the right, depending on which way it presents on your screen, but the image that looks like a person is in fact what looks like the head is a poodle's tail, and then the rest of the body is the head, and what looks like the 2 legs are the front legs of the dog, and you can't see the back legs. And I've used this image quite a lot to kind of question what we think we see, and to question, going back to kind of bringing it full circle, but question what we're doing. And you know, if we want data to suggest to find data to suggest that red wine is good for us, we'll find it. If you want data to suggest red wine is bad for you, you'll find it. So you know, really questioning what we're doing, why we're doing it, and crucially how we're doing it. Thank you.